Welcome back to the Worth Your Time podcast. I'm your host, Erica, as always, and I'm excited today to be joined by Natalie Runion. Natalie, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Erica, thanks for having me. I'm so glad we have connected through social media. It's been really great just to meet you and learn about your ministry.
Yeah, you too. Of course, like so many of us, I found you on Instagram, and I don't know how you popped up, but I started seeing all the stuff you were putting out there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am so tracking with this girl. I've got to connect with her. So, and then I saw you were writing a book, and I'm writing a book, and so I figured we would have a lot in common. And now we're following each other on TikTok.
I know, I saw that. I'm so bad at TikTok.
Trying to be good at TikTok. It's like I started doing this stuff all about church because they say like just have a niche, just do one thing. And so I'm like, okay, I don't really care about anything else on TikTok, so I'm just gonna do it and see what happens. And it's kind of working. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, your family, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so my husband and I, Tony, we live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We have two girls. They are 13 and 9. We're originally from Ohio and Kentucky, so we've been in Colorado for 5 years now, where I'm on staff at New Life Church. I am a women's pastor. I'm the women's pastor there, as well as the creative pastor of family ministry. So I have been a worship leader most of my adult career. I was a pastor's kid until I graduated high school, and then ended up in full-time ministry. So I've been a worship leader about 20 years, and now really moving into more of like the teaching and mentorship as a women's pastor. And then I lead a beautiful children's choir here at New Life and get to do a lot of songwriting and things like that. So that is in a nutshell what I do now. And then I started a ministry called Raised to Stay. That is for those of us who have been raised in the church and have gone through some church hurt, gone through our own little faith crisis, or wandering and wondering, and we're still here and trying to navigate now what it looks like to be in the church as adults, and also raising our own kids in church. But really the tagline to Raise to Stay is why we could have quit and why we choose to stay. So that's pretty much what I'm working on now. My book comes out. We don't have a title on it yet, but it's along those lines. Next summer with David T. Cook. So it's been a busy but really exciting season.
Okay, I just love this concept so much that you have, because it is so needed right now. I mean, obviously anyone that has any foot in the Christian faith world right now knows what's going on with deconstruction. And of course that means many different things depending on who you're talking about. I don't necessarily think it's always bad, but it sometimes is not great.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that comes from people that were raised in the church. And you see, I've been working on an article that I'm writing for something. And I've talked to a couple of deconstruction coaches and gotten some information from them. And a lot of the people that they work with are from like evangelical backgrounds. And so have you sort of been in community with people that are going through that? And did that inspire you at all in what you're doing?
Yeah, because I was watching, I grew up with very talented people, musicians and worship leaders and pastors and people that grew up the same way I did. And then suddenly in our 30s, they just left. There was no warning. It was just all of a sudden this person or these people who were thriving or seemingly thriving in leadership positions in the church, all of a sudden we're like, you know what? I'm good. And I had to ask why. And then I found myself in that same place at 40 years old, kind of like, you know what? I might be done with this. And not just my role in a church, but actually like what I do for the kingdom. Like this is a lot of work, and it actually, I get hurt more than I'm getting helped. And so I started asking myself, like, why am I having this when I feel like my faith is pretty strong? If I'm wrestling like this, then no wonder people who don't really have that same background as me are questioning and wandering and wrestling. And is that okay? And are we allowed to? And look, I'm all for a deconstruction if you have the emotional, spiritual, and physical stability to rebuild. Because I think we all need to ask ourselves these questions. But what's happening is people are deconstructing and then they have no community, they have no accountability to walk that out and then rebuild their faith, you know? So I've really just spent the last couple of years asking my friends, people that are in my family, my own blood family, you know, why are you we were raised the same. Why all of a sudden are you out? And those conversations, when you ask that question, you hear things that are true, honest, and actually really hard to hear.
What are some of the things that you hear people talking about?
I think the number one thing is I had a problem, or I was going through an affair, I was going through an addiction, whatever, and the church had absolutely no interest in helping me overcome it. I became a source of gossip. I became a source of, these are what they're saying. My situation was not kept in privacy. I went to pastors and told them this was what I was dealing with, and I became the source of prayer meetings. I became the source of I was used as an example. I had positions removed from me. And so rather than the church really stepping up and being the church to some of these kids that had been raised in their own care, they became discarded or easily removed. And there was no ministry done within that very house. And so it was I believe, a really validating reason to feel betrayed and to feel unseen. They went from being celebrated and loved to suddenly shunned and no longer valuable, and that's hard. That how do you coach people out of that place?
Yeah. And so with your ministry, what are some of the key points that you address when you're talking about these things, or you're talking to some of these people that have been there?
Yeah, I go back to my own disappointments, and I think the easy thing to do is just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, if this one organization or this one church or this one leader hurt me, then I'm just going to assume that that is across the board how all churches and Christians and leaders are. Steve Cuss, who wrote Leadership Anxiety, he talks, this is called same species syndrome, where we get hurt, we get disappointed, we're abused. And I want to be really clear about this. When I talk about staying in a church or an organization, I am not talking about staying in toxic, abusive environments. What I'm talking about is staying connected with Jesus. And we can remove ourselves from an organization or from a church because we've been hurt without actually leaving Jesus. And what Steve Cuss talks about is the same species syndrome, where we associate one hurt or one experience with the church or with the leader and assume that it's going to happen for the rest of our lives in any church or organization that we belong to. And when it happens to us in our 20s or in our formative years, whether we were sexually abused as children in a church or emotionally abused by a leader, there is a natural fight or flight that happens in us where we either run away completely or we dig in and we get combative and we start Twitter wars and we kind of go to the other side of things. And what I'm trying to teach people and raise to say is that God is ultimately the only one who will not fail us or leave us. People are going to disappoint us. They are going to betray us. There is going to be a Judas at every table. There will be a King Saul at every relationship where we're betrayed by a leader. But in that, we always know that Jesus is sitting at that same table with us. And so the hope with Raised to Stay is that we kind of take the focus off the hurt and the bitterness and the betrayal and put our eyes back on the healer and a community that there are still good people in churches who are committed to loving us well.
And I would say probably more good people than bad.
Yeah.
Obviously, those bad experiences and situations in churches really are the loudest voices in the room when you hear about things. One thing that I sort of, made this comparison as I was doing work for my book was, when you think about someone that's been in, if you're just talking about an abusive relationship, for example, if they get out of that abusive relationship, like they might have like a fear or even a hatred of men or, whatever it was that was the abusive thing. But that doesn't mean that all men are going to treat them that way. Same thing with like childhood trauma. When you look at a kid that's been through a lot, like they have so much healing and rebuilding to do. And it's the same thing with like a relationship with a church. If you let it fester, it's not going to get any better, but you have to do the work to sort of find that healing, because it's just not healthy. Whatever you're talking about in life, it's not healthy to let something just infect you with bitterness and anger, and I see that a lot online. I've actually TikTok is where I saw a lot of that recently. Was very shocked by all the negative comments I was getting about just like sharing some basic data about how church improves your life. But yeah, I think that's a great point that sometimes doesn't really sink in with people. Um, when it comes to church, a lot of people say, that you're part of the universal church, obviously, as a Christian, which is, the larger body of, everyone that's a Christian, we're part of the universal church. But the local church is sort of like the second component of church. And I still hear it, I still see it, that you don't need church to be a Christian and to have a relationship with God. And I always say, well, yeah, that's true. You don't need it. But like, why should you want it? Why does God want us to be a part of that? What makes you want to stay?
Yeah, and my mom and I were talking about this in the car yesterday, that it would have been really easy based off of what our family walked out in my later teen years of ministry, just to really forsake community altogether, because it does feel like a collective betrayal. Like I was part of this family, and now that family didn't protect me, so therefore I'm now, an orphan in this church environment. And when we're rejected, that is kind of the first place we go, is, well, then I need to find another community that will receive me as I am. And when you are rejected by that community, I feel like it's one of the worst pains. I think church hurt is actually worse than when we have family fallouts, if I'm being honest, because we have shared sacred moments with people, we've prayed with people, we have been vulnerable with people, and suddenly that feels like we've been violated. But what my mom and I were saying in the car last night is, we think one of the reasons why we have stuck it out is, number one, we honestly love Jesus so much. And Jesus loves his church. And so when you love Jesus, you love what he loves. It's that verse, I want my heart to break for what breaks yours, the orphan, the widow, the marginalized. And when we really kind of go and do the hard work, like what you were talking about, counseling, and if we need medication, whatever it looks like, when we really do the hard work of unpacking the hurt and separating our hurt from Jesus, we realize that our love for Jesus is actually still there, and he will slowly start to restore the things that he loves and put that back in our heart. And for us, we really do love his church. We really do love his people. And when I can honestly say I have been hurt, and the reason I'm hurt is because I loved those people more than anything. And the reason that hurt is because I allowed myself to love. Then we can slowly start to learn how to love again. That doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to trust right away. It doesn't mean that we're going to let all these people back into our lives, but we start